Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Saturday, April 5th, 2025. This is the Excerpt. Today, a judge has ordered the U.S. to bring a deported Maryland man back from an El Salvador prison. Plus, the latest on a brutal end to the week for the markets and the military shifts on climate change. A federal judge said the Trump administration acted illegally when it deported a Maryland man in error to El Salvador and ordered that he be returned. That's after his wife Jennifer and others fought for weeks to bring him home.
In a blink of an eye, our three children lost their father, and I lost the love of my life.
I spoke with USA Today White House correspondent Michael Collins for more. Michael, thank you so much for joining me on this.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little, if you would, about Kilmar, his background, and how he was initially brought in, Michael, by immigration officials last month.
Kilmar is a 29-year-old father of three. He lives in Beltsville, Maryland, which is about half an hour outside of Washington, D.C. It's roughly between Washington and Baltimore. And he came to the United States when he was a teenager in 2011. He's from El Salvador, and his parents sent him to the U.S. to get him away from gang activity. He said he was being pressured by a lot of the gangs down there to join them. So he's been here for a number of years. He worked for a while as a day laborer, getting whatever jobs he could get. But a few years ago, he got work as an apprentice sheet metal worker. And so he was doing very well for himself. He'd gotten married. He lived in a nice suburb in Beltsville, Maryland. And he had a son. He has a biological son. He has two other children that he's raising his own. So he seemed to be living the American dream, if you will. What happened to him was on March the 12th, he finished up his work at a new job site in Baltimore, and he picked up his son, who was staying with the child's grandmother, and they were heading home, and he got pulled over in an IKEA parking lot by immigration officials. They told him that his immigration status had changed. They arrested him, and then 3 days later, he was sent back to El Salvador. He was put in a prison down there that is notoriously violent. This case is complicated, though, because Kilmar had a protective order in a separate case from a few years ago. Under this order, the government was barred from deporting him, but the Trump administration deported him anyway. So attorneys for the U.S. government admitted in court records earlier this week that they had made a mistake, that he should not have been deported. But they said they can't get him back because he is in El Salvador. It's a foreign country. The U.S. has no jurisdiction there. So the U.S. government makes the argument that, yes, it was a mistake that we sent him there, but now we can't get him back.
All right, so fast forward to this judge's decision yesterday, Michael. What did a judge formally order? And I guess how did his family also really fight to make this happen?
A federal judge in Maryland ruled that the Trump administration had acted illegally when they deported him. She noted the protective order that had been in place since 2019. And she said the administration acted illegally when they deported him, and she ordered that he must be returned to the United States. She gave the administration until Monday night to bring him back to the country.
And Michael, does this decision mean anything, I guess, more broadly for deportations or Trump immigration policy in terms of just kind of what we've seen over the last few weeks?
It's hard to say because this case was specific to Abrego Garcia. His family had sued to bring him back, citing this protective order that he had from 2019. But this case could potentially affect other cases that the administration has because they have sent a number of people that they've arrested to El Salvador and sent them to this prison. So with this ruling, the administration really can no longer make the argument that they no longer have jurisdiction over these guys once they're in El Salvador. The argument that they had made was that because Abrego Garcia was now in El Salvador, that the U.S. government has no authority to order that he be returned. But the judge yesterday simply did not buy that argument. She noted that the U.S. government has paid El Salvador $6 million to house prisoners from the U.S., And she said it only makes sense that if you have some sort of contractual agreement with another country to take in these prisoners, then it only reasons that you could also ask that they be returned.
Michael Collins covers the White House for USA Today. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
The Justice Department will appeal the order to the Richmond-based 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, according to a court filing after the hearing. U.S. stocks closed sharply lower, with the blue-chip Dow shedding more than 2,200 points and the tech-heavy Nasdaq falling into a bear market on trade war worries. China's Commerce Ministry said the country will impose a 34% tax on all U.S. products, matching President Donald Trump's levy on Chinese goods coming into the U.S. China's retaliatory tariff is effective next week. The country also added several companies to its so-called unreliable entities list, which asserts that they have broken market rules or contractual commitments. China opened an antitrust investigation into DuPont yesterday. Its shares shed nearly 13%. The UK, Australia, and Italy also reportedly had talks yesterday to discuss potential damage from tariffs. Retaliation raises the odds Trump's aggressive tariff plan will spark a full-blown trade war, reignite inflation, and slow the economy. Other countries around the world have promised retaliatory tariffs too. JP Morgan now sees a 60% chance of a U.S. recession this year. Still, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell kept his cool, saying in a speech yesterday that tariffs will increase inflation and slow the economy, but the central bank would wait and see on the fallout of the tariffs before making any interest rate decisions. Democratic attorneys general in 16 states, led by New York, sued the Trump administration yesterday over its cancellation of National Institutes of Health research grants, the group called Critical for life-saving medical research. The NIH began terminating tens of millions of grants last month based on President Trump's orders to abolish diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, according to the federal lawsuit filed in Massachusetts. Letters terminating grants said they targeted DEI, transgender issues, or vaccine hesitancy, the lawsuit said. The case was filed the same week the Department of Health and Human Services laid off 10,000 more workers as part of a move to cut nearly one-fourth of its staff to reduce government spending. Some conservatives have criticized the NIH for having close ties to pharmaceutical companies and for creating a funding system where government scientists decide research priorities. Other critics argue NIH is too woke or has not done enough to study the potential negative impacts of abortion and gender-affirming care. The Trump administration has signaled the military will not be focusing on climate change. That marks an abrupt shift, as I discussed with USA Today national correspondent Dinah Voiles-Pulver. Hello, Dinah.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for hopping on. Really important story here, Dinah. So just starting with this, how does our military increasingly serve on the front lines of the battle against some of these impacts of climate change? And really, how has the department been active in documenting the risks and impacts as well for generations?
The military, our troops are increasingly responding to weather events made worse by climate change. Scientists tell us that we're dealing with hotter temperatures and more extreme rainfall. So the military is dealing with hotter temperatures in countries everywhere the troops serve, especially in the Middle East, where temperatures are rising faster than they are in other locations. They've documented an increase in heat-related illnesses among the troops. They've also seen incidents of melting pavement on the runways at some of the air bases. They've spent money to protect against increased high tide flooding at coastal bases. They've been building seawalls and reinforcing sand dunes. They've also seen flooding even in Middle America from some of this extreme rainfall. And then where they serve in the Pacific, the troops have seen rising sea levels in some of our key Pacific Ocean territories and also with some of the countries that are our close allies. And some of these changes the military has been seeing since very early on. The U.S. military was one of really the first departments to raise concern about climate change. And even as far back as the 1980s and the Jimmy Carter administration, the military was raising concerns about the implications of climate change on national and international security.
Right. So considering some of that context, that historical context, what are we now hearing from this new administration about really an apparent shift in the Defense Department stance?
In some of the videos and statements that we've seen lately, the Defense Secretary and Pete Hegseth and some of his department leaders have said things about how they're going to avoid focusing on climate change. He actually stated in a post on X that the Department of Defense does not do climate change crap. We do training and war fighting. And then his Pentagon spokesman said in a video that the department was eliminating woke climate change programs. We went to the department and asked them, what does that mean? Does this mean you're going to depart from some of the things that the military has already been working on? But we did not get any clarification from them on what that means.
As for the man at the head of the military, how does Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth have really a history, Dinah, of downplaying climate change?
He's among those Republicans who has tried to steer away from that conversation in the past. In a Fox News clip in 2020, Hegseth called concern about the climate threat a religion, and he criticized Senator Bernie Sanders, who called it a major national security issue.
You write about Project 2025 in this piece, Dinah. How does that enter this conversation? Does it have an influence here on the administration's, I guess, military climate shift?
The cuts that we've seen so far seem to follow a playbook suggested by the panel of experts that wrote the Heritage Foundation's mandate for Leadership 2025, the Conservative Promise. That's the official name of this document that people refer to as Project 2025, and it mentions climate change several times. It recommended prioritizing the core roles and responsibilities of the military over social engineering and non-defense matters, including climate change. Several times, the authors referred to the need to refocus the military, refocus some of the other directions of the federal government to get away from things that they refer to as woke climate change or climate change alarmism.
What do national security experts or climate scientists say about all this, Dinah?
They're in part surprised and in part dismayed or concerned about if there is going to be some sort of change in focus. They're afraid of what that could mean for the safety of troops and international security. Robert Young, who's a geology professor at Western Carolina University, he studies coastal change. He said the military has really been incredibly enlightened on climate change up to this point. And he said that any role that anyone plays in not allowing the department to adapt to the changing natural environment at the military bases here and our bases around the world could be detrimental to our ability to maintain national security. These experts raise concerns about what's happening in the Arctic and what's happening in the Pacific. The melting of the sea ice in the Arctic is demanding a stronger U.S. presence as the troops are concerned, about the influence of Russia in the Arctic Ocean, and having troops there more often or longer in the Arctic represents a problem because the conditions are so cold. Even though it's warming and the ice is melting, the conditions are still really cold for troops that have to serve there. In the Pacific, they're already seeing problems with rising sea levels, having an influence on some of the island nations. In addition to that, they're just concerned about the influence of China in the Pacific and trying to figure out how to maintain a strong presence with the U.S. allies. And some of the experts are concerned that if they pull away from climate change, that could have a detrimental impact on our relationships with our allies in the Pacific.
All right, Dinah Vols-Pulver is a national correspondent covering climate and the environment for USA Today. Thank you, Dinah.
Thank you so much, Taylor.
TikTok is safe in the U.S., at least for now. After briefly going dark following a ban in January, President Trump extended the deadline for Chinese parent company ByteDance to sell its U.S. assets by today via executive order. Yesterday, Trump announced on social media that he was signing a second executive order to extend the deadline another 75 days. On Wednesday of this week, Trump met with top members of his administration to consider potential investors who could purchase a stake in the app. You can read more with a link in today's show notes. The national championship game is now set. In women's college basketball, South Carolina beat Texas and UConn upset UCLA in the Final Four last night. That sets up the national title game tomorrow afternoon. Later today, the men's tournament will hold its Final Four as Florida takes on Auburn before Houston battles Duke. You can follow along with USA Today Sports, and if you submitted a bracket a few weeks back, be sure to check out how you're doing in our bracket challenge. Under the Trump administration, dozens of programs that were once available to immigrants with a path to the U.S. have been or will be eliminated.
The folks who thought that they followed the rules in coming to the United States as they were written during the Biden administration have found that the rules have changed.
How might this all play out for the estimated 2 million people here now? You can hear my colleague Dana Taylor's conversation with USA Today immigration and border reporter Lauren Villagran tomorrow, beginning at 5 a.m. Eastern Time. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio. And if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back Monday with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.